Always encouraging to be able to worship together. Throughout the throughout the Bible, we have periodically these blurs or a faint, shadowy glimpse of what it will be like when we get to heaven. And there's really only one word to describe it, and perhaps the human language would fail to describe with any certain adequacy what it's like to be in heaven. But the only word that comes to my mind is awesome. In the truest, awe inspiring, full of glory, it's going to be awesome. There's several people, biblical characters, that get those short bursts of glory. Um, we can look at Ezekiel and the vision that he gets. We could turn to the last book and look at John's vision, a short glimpse, perhaps the most extensive of what heaven would be like. We could even throw into the mix, we could throw someone like Job. As the book of Job comes to a close, you remember here's this whirlwind, the storm billowing here in the distance. And as Elihu speaks, the thunder and the lightning, and from the storm comes the booming voice of the Lord. What must that be like to hear the voice of God? And even to be on the banks of the Jordan River and to hear the voice of God saying, "This is my son." How awesome that would be. I want to turn and look at Isaiah in chapter 6, a short burst of a vision that he receives. And it's undescribable. I mean, it's just absolutely undescribable. And originally, I was going to cram all this into one lesson, but nobody wants to sit here for about an hour. So, for your sake and for your friend's sake, we're going to break it up into a couple of parts. But read with me Isaiah chapter 6, the first 7 verses here, as we look at Isaiah's brief glimpse into the throne room of the Lord. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, "Woe is me, for I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." Then one seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, "Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for." It's short, but in the short period that Isaiah gets this glimpse into the throne room, I don't want to miss anything. And I know I will. But I want to draw your attention to what Isaiah saw here in the first couple of verses. Look at what he saw. He saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. This is what he saw. And our attention is drawn, first of all, the very first thing that is mentioned, right? I mean, the centerpiece, if you will, of this vision is the Lord. Now, this is interesting. As you might suspect, here is the Lord, and the word to describe him, as we might suspect, would be Yahweh, right? I mean, here is, and we might suspect that covenantal, the tetragrammaton, YHWH, the Jehovah, right? As we think about, and our mind may go back to Exodus chapter 4, Exodus chapter 3, rather, the burning bush. Who am I going to say sent me? I am who I am, right? But that's not who he says here. I saw the Lord Adonai, emphasizing not necessarily the covenant of God, but emphasizing the mastery of God. So we understand as he sees here, the emphasis is on I saw the Lord. I saw the one who is the master. I saw the Lord. I saw the one who has the supreme authority over, and he's looking out, right? The supreme one, the one who has all authority. I saw the Lord. And notice again, he sees the Lord, the centerpiece, and the emphasis is on God. And look at what is going on here. His eyes, visually, he sees, I saw the Lord seated on his throne. I see the Lord. We see God in supreme authority, and intrinsic in that, of course, is God has authority, Isaiah does not. So, Isaiah, in submission to God, I see God, the Lord, I see the Lord Adonai seated on his throne. This is where the Lord is. He's seated. How many of you, just curious here, how many of you have the chair at home? The chair. I might be the only one. Okay, here we go. It's the chair. It's the chair that I go to, and it's my favorite chair. And it's the chair that I strategically position for uh, mostly naps, but that's that's my chair. Here is the Lord, and we could say the Lord seated on his throne. And you think about the seated position, and of course, here's the Lord, the master, right? Supreme authority, and he has supreme authority, and he is seated. Isn't that interesting? So we see again this glimpse that we get of God. He is the Lord Adonai, he is supreme authority, and he is seated. And we understand in the seated position, he's completely at ease. Although he has the supreme authority over everything, he is at total ease, seated on his throne. Archie Bunker had a chair, didn't he? This is better than his chair. This is the throne of Adonai, the master, the Lord, right? The supreme authority, and he is seated at the throne. Now, again, when we think about the throne, we're thinking about power, dominion, rule, sovereignty. So we see his, again, emphasizing who he is Adonai. This gives us a glimpse or hints of God's omniscience? How God is all-knowing, right? How God there is nothing new under the sun. I listened to a sermon a couple of weeks ago as Wayne Jackson, and he said this, and I thought it was kind of interesting, took me off guard. He said, "The Lord never had a bright idea." Have you ever thought about that? All his ideas are bright. He never had a brainstorming session where he got together with his friends and said, we got a problem. We got to come up with a solution here. God is all knowing, his omniscience. And it gives us a hint of his omniscience here as he is seated on his throne and wafts of his omnipotence as we see him on his throne. Of course, and God is completely omnipotent and beyond all powerful. God never had a power struggle. God never had to step into a certain situation and say, now listen here, I'm in control. He never had to exercise a certain amount of authority to show his dominance. That's just who God is. And we see it. Here is the master, the Lord Adonai, and he is seated on his throne. Keep going. His throne, here in this position, he is two things: high and lifted up. He's seated upon his throne, high and lifted up. Now, we might suspect as we go throughout the New Testament, we might suspect that here is God and he is seated in Jerusalem. That would make sense, wouldn't it? After all, that's the temple. You could go to London and you could walk, probably not right into Buckingham Palace, but you could probably see it, the location. But look at the location of God. It's simply high. In my mind, I think, well, it's extraterrestrial. It's out of this world, right? I mean, it's high and it extends above. This is his sovereignty, right? Where does God rule? It's not in London. It's not in Jerusalem. It's high. It's high. And from that, we see his exalted state, his exaltation, and that it is lifted up. So it stands there as Isaiah sees the throne of God, as he sees the Lord, the master, the sovereign ruler of the universe, completely at ease, high, exalted, far above the dominion and rule of any man. This is the Lord. This is the vision that Isaiah gets here. And then you continue here in verse 2. Above him it starts. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And we're sitting here, we're reading it, and we're just kind of scratching our heads like, what in the world? I've never seen one of those things before. Interestingly enough, this is the only time in the Bible that they're mentioned. Very fascinating. Again, the shadowy glimpse of the throne. Like, wow, this is somewhat strange. But the unique characteristic is the 6 wings, right? With 2, they covered their face. With 2, they covered their feet. And with 2, they flew. FFF, like any good preacher. Face, feet, and they flew. I don't know why. I mean, let me just say that I don't understand, and I don't know why. But do you think perhaps they covered their face because of the glory of God and an unworthiness to be in the glory of God? Perhaps. Again, I don't know. Do you think they covered their feet for an unworthiness to walk into the presence of God? There's two remaining. They covered their face, they covered their feet, and the only set of wings left, as you look here in this passage, they served the Lord. The focus is not on these angelic beings. By the way, I don't know what kind of image comes to your mind, but literally, seraphim, they are literally fiery ones. So it's not this cute little cuddly baby flying around in heaven with six wings. It's this fiery inferno that is serving the Almighty God. But that's not the focus, is it? It's the Lord. It's reminiscent of, perhaps different than though, Romans or Revelation chapter 4 and verse 8. There again, the throne room, the scene similarly is that there are four living creatures and they are serving the Lord. They're crying out a very similar message. There they're screaming, "Holy, holy, holy." What are they screaming here? Holy, holy, holy. I don't know the purpose, and I don't know the reason behind all of this. And I've got more questions than I have answers, but I find it extremely encouraging to know that here are these fiery, angelic, and majestic beings who can only serve God, who can't see Him, who can't come into His presence, but our prayers come into the presence of God. Here are these angelic beings who long to be in the presence of God, and our very prayers rise to the ears of the Almighty. This is what He sees. Consider next what He heard. Verse 3 and verse 4. And one called to another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of His glory." And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. The first thing that he hears after seeing the Lord high and lifted up, seated upon his throne, and seeing these angelic beings, the first thing he hears are these words: Holy, holy, holy. If there's one thing that you need to know about God, it's this: holy, holy, holy. I mean, the rudimentary definition of what it means to be holy is to be set apart, right? This is what we teach our little children from a very young age. To be holy is to be set apart. Here is God. The description given about the Lord is this: He is set apart, set apart, set apart. Where is He? He is high, lifted up, seated upon His throne. Holy, holy, holy. is the Lord of hosts. May the whole earth be full of his glory. And then he hears. I mean, other than holy, 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 is there anything else that needs to be said about God? He hears this voice in verse 4, and it says, "At the voice of him who called." That's what we know. At the voice of him who called. Two things happened here as this voice called. One, the thresholds shook. Two, this room, the house, it was filled with smoke. At the voice of the one who called, the thresholds shook. This is where it gets a little interesting. Thresholds, well, that's the doorway, right? I mean that's the threshold. And it's not necessarily the threshold shook, is it? Well, that's not what it says. It says the foundations of the threshold shook. I'll tell you, and everybody to each their own here, okay? But if I am walking and I see the foundations of that door shake, I ain't going in. I'm just I'm just right here. I'll be here. Tell me what it's like. But you see, I mean, Isaiah, it seems from the outside looking in, he's seeing the Lord Adonai high and lifted up, exalted above everything. And he hears this voice, and the foundations of the thresholds began to shake, as if to say, be careful. At the very least, be careful about coming in. Or at the most, you're not worthy to come in. He sees this scene, and the doors are shaking. The foundations are shaking. Now, let's make a connection here very quickly. As if to say, you're not worthy to come in, or be careful about coming in. These seraphim flying around, and they've got these six wings. With two, they covered their face, and with two, they covered their feet. As if to say, I can't come in. So he sees that, right? He sees this, the foundations of the threshold, and they're shaking. And then the house, this room, is filled with smoke. It gets filled with smoke. I mean, my mind, I don't know where your mind goes, but my mind automatically goes back to the dedication of the temple. And you remember, after this prayer, this dedication, that Solomon, after completing that temple, he prays this prayer, and the whole temple filled with smoke in the presence of God right there. It's almost the very same thing, isn't it? What a scene. Now, this is interesting, isn't it? Let's make another connection. If it's filled with smoke, what is hindered at this point? Well, it's the visual. You can't see through the smoke. The whole house is filled with smoke. These seraphim, they're flying around, they're serving God, doing his beckoning call, and with two wings they cover their feet, not crossing the threshold. And with two, they're covering their face, not seeing the glory of God. Interesting. I'm reminded of this, and I can't read this. The voice of the Lord booming like this, shaking the thresholds, filling the room with smoke without thinking about this particular psalm. 29, it reads like this. Short, I'm going to read it all, and you're going to like it. All right. Psalm 29, beginning in verse 1, it says this. Note the connections. Ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The glory of God thunders, the Lord over many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon to skip like a calf and Sirion like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord flashes forth flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the deer give birth and strips the forest bare. And in his temple all cry glory. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord sits enthroned as a king forever. May the Lord give strength to his people. May the Lord bless his people with peace. It's almost a mirror image of what Isaiah gets to see. And he gets to see it, to feel it, and to experience it. The voice of the Lord. And it's awesome. That last part, that very last verse, it almost seems, as you read through this psalm, it almost seems out of place. May the Lord give strength to his people. May the Lord bless his people with peace. But I, for one, am thankful that it's in there. Because here's the voice of the Lord as you read through it in Psalm 29 that is so powerful. It is destructive and also creative. It is inviting and almost so powerful that it is unbearable. And the end is, may the Lord give strength to his people. May the Lord bless his people with peace. Because you see, even with this image of God, Adonai seated on his throne, high and lifted up, exalted above the earth. And you hear these angelic beings crying out, holy, 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 that's God. You see the thresholds, the foundations shaking, and the house filled with smoke. And yet, through it all, the voice of the Lord cuts through and says, come. Because you can come into the presence of God by the grace of our Savior, if you want to. He promises not a glimpse of God one day. He promises a life with him for all eternity. If you live faithfully, if you commit to him in baptism, that promise is for you. If you need to answer that invitation of God, why don't you come as we stand?